I took a night job at a private wildlife facility in northern Pennsylvania. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the cages. It was how every hallway had two sets of locks. One for keeping things in, and one for keeping people out. Asterisk, I took the night job because it was quiet and temporary. A short contract at a private wildlife facility tucked into a wooded valley in northern Pennsylvania. The kind of place that did not advertise openings and did not ask many questions. On my first evening, the guard at the gate checked my badge twice and wrote my name in a ledger that already held years of cramped handwriting, then buzzed me through without saying anything, leaving the gate to close behind me with a soft mechanical patience that felt practiced. The building sat low against the trees, concrete and metal softened by moss and rain, and the air carried a clean chemical smell that reminded me of hospitals more than barns. Inside, the hallways were narrow and evenly lit, and every door had two locks set at different heights, one near the handle and another closer to the floor, a detail that registered slowly as I walked past. My orientation consisted of a clipboard, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and a map that showed only the areas I was cleared to enter, its edges worn as if revised often. The work itself seemed ordinary enough at first, checking temperatures, recording humidity, confirming that power indicators stayed green, and listening for alarms that never sounded. What felt off was the silence, not empty silence, but the kind that pressed back, broken only by distant ventilation and the steady ticking of my watch as I moved from room to room. I noticed that the security cameras avoided certain angles, their lenses fixed slightly away from doors or corners, and that some corridors were brighter than others without any obvious reason. In the break room, a fridge hummed beside a corkboard layered with outdated schedules, and someone had taped a page of rules so many times it had turned thin, emphasizing procedures about access, communication, and documentation in careful, neutral language. I followed my route exactly, resisting the urge to linger, and still found myself slowing near the reinforced windows that looked into enclosed spaces I could not fully see, where reflections overlapped with shadows. Nothing moved while I watched, yet the sense of being observed settled in as a physical weight, subtle but persistent. Near the end of the shift, a delivery truck rolled in without headlights, its engine idling until the dock doors opened, and the cameras along that stretch pivoted together as if guided by a single hand. I logged the time, checked the seals on my assigned doors, and left before dawn, telling myself the unease came from unfamiliar routines. Driving away, I glanced back once and saw the lights remain on behind me, steady and awake, as though the place did not sleep when the staff went home. By morning, the valley filled with fog, erasing roads and signs, and I wondered why the contract mentioned discretion so often, as if quiet mistakes traveled farther here, carried by trees, wires, and locked doors after dark always nearby. Asterisk, on my third night, I was assigned to inventory, a task that sounded clerical but carried its own rules, because every item had to be checked against a ledger kept in a locked cabinet that only opened during night shifts. The ledger used numbers instead of names, and the columns tracked weight, temperature tolerance, feeding windows, and something labeled compliance, which was never explained. I followed the map to the storage wing and noticed the floor changed texture halfway down the corridor, smoother and easier to clean, and the lights shifted to a softer hue that hid corners. A supervisor I had not met before appeared without introduction and walked ahead of me, tapping doors with a knuckle as if counting, then stopped and reminded me not to answer questions that were not asked by staff. He said it casually, like a reminder to sign out, and left before I could respond. In the loading area, the cameras were turned inward, watching the room rather than the doors, and a pallet waited under a tarp that breathed in small movements when the air system cycled. I recorded serial numbers, checked seals, and avoided looking too closely, because the rules stressed efficiency over curiosity. Later, while reconciling entries, I noticed gaps in the ledger where dates skipped forward and backward, as if pages had been removed and returned out of order. The compliance column showed steady marks until a sudden blank that continued for weeks, then resumed with a different ink. I asked the guard at the gate about it, and he shrugged, saying records catch up eventually. During rounds, I heard a sound like a chair leg dragged across concrete from a room marked unavailable, and when I paused, the sound stopped exactly as my footsteps did. The rule book said to keep moving, so I did, but my flashlight beam shook enough to smear shadows along the wall. Near dawn, the delivery truck returned, empty this time, and the dock smelled faintly of soap, as if something had been cleaned carefully. Before leaving, I signed the ledger and saw my name written again in a different hand, dated for a night I had not worked yet, with a small note in the margin reminding me to bring gloves. I did not mention it to anyone, but the next evening my locker held a second pair already labeled, and the schedule on the fridge had been altered to include my initials on tasks I had not agreed to. As I moved through the wing, the intercom clicked on and off without announcements, and doors unlocked a second before I reached them, then relocked behind me. By the time my shift ended, I understood the job rewarded those who followed patterns and corrected those who tried to make their own. That lesson settled quietly, like dust after a door closed, leaving the air clear enough to breathe, and heavy enough to notice when it changed during nights that followed without any warning. Asterisk. The older wing revealed itself by accident when a maintenance alert rerouted my path, sending me through a service corridor that was not on my map and did not appear on the wall directory either. The tiles there were intact, but mismatched, as if replaced one at a time over decades, and the air carried a dry, medicinal scent that felt preserved rather than fresh. I followed the alert to a junction where the lights stayed on even when my badge failed to register, and the door opened anyway with a measured pause that suggested someone had timed it before. Inside, the rooms were smaller and arranged with an earlier logic. Heavy doors, thick frames, and narrow windows set too high to be useful. On one wall, dates had been written in pencil in a vertical line, some crossed out, some circled, and others underlined twice, with the most recent date erased so thoroughly the paint beneath had thinned. I logged the temperature and humidity as instructed, though the instruments already displayed values that matched the ledger entries exactly, and I wondered how often they were checked if the numbers never drifted. As I moved on, I noticed the sound of my steps returned a fraction late, like an echo held back, and when I stopped, the delay remained, a soft scuff that did not belong to me. The intercom crackled and fell silent, and a lock slid home somewhere behind the wall, not loud enough to be alarming, but clear enough to count. In a narrow observation room, the reinforced glass reflected my face over an empty enclosure, and for a moment the reflection lagged, blinking after I had already turned away. I wrote it down as fatigue and kept moving, because the rule book valued notes over explanations. In a side office, a binder sat open on a desk, dusted clean around its edges, and the pages listed staff entries with dates, assignments, and outcomes that were described in the same neutral terms used for equipment: repaired, reassigned, decommissioned. My name appeared once, penciled lightly, followed by a blank line left wide enough for a paragraph. I closed the binder and returned it to the exact angle it had been left, noticing the chair across from the desk was warm, as if recently occupied. When I exited, the hallway lights dimmed and brightened in sequence ahead of me, guiding my steps without hurrying them. A voice came through the glass in a nearby room, not raised, not strained, asking if the schedule had changed again, and the question included the time of my last round. I did not answer, because the rules were clear, but the silence that followed felt attentive rather than disappointed. By the time I reached the main corridor, My badge worked again. My map showed the correct routes, and the alert cleared itself without record. I left at dawn with clean gloves unused, and found the erase date rewritten on the wall in a darker line when I passed later that week. Set to a night, I was now scheduled to work. By the middle of the second week, my routines had become predictable enough that I could feel when they were being followed. Not watched exactly, but noted, like a checklist being filled out somewhere beyond the walls. Doors unlocked in sequence as I approached, never early enough to startle me, never late enough to slow me down, and the intercom remained silent, except for brief clicks that suggested someone testing the line. During one round, I was assigned to verify pressure seals in a reinforced corridor, where the glass panels were thicker and clearer than anywhere else, designed for observation without distortion. And as I walked the length of it, I became aware of my own breathing reflected back at me in the glass, steady and measured. Halfway down, I stopped to adjust my glove and realized the sound did not stop with me, continuing for a count too long before fading. I did not write that down. At the final panel, a light inside the enclosure came on without a switch being thrown, illuminating a space that appeared empty except for a chair bolted to the floor and a table with nothing on it. I checked the seal indicator and felt a vibration through the concrete, a low resonance like machinery starting far away. Then a voice came from the other side of the glass, calm and even, asking if I was still on nights, or if the schedule had moved me earlier. And the question used my first name the way a coworker would, without emphasis. I froze with my hand still on the clipboard, because the rulebook did not forbid hearing, only responding, and the voice did not repeat itself or press for an answer. Instead, it commented on the temperature, noting it had been adjusted since the previous evening, and mentioned that the lights in the older wing flickered at predictable intervals. Each observation was accurate and recent, drawn from details I had not shared aloud. I focused on my checklist, marking the seal as intact, and the voice continued once more, saying it appreciated consistency and that the previous person had not kept notes as neatly. There was no threat in it, no impatience, only an expectation that silence was a choice being made. I stepped back, and the light inside dimmed to its prior level, leaving only my reflection in the faint outline of the room. On my way out, the intercom chimed softly, and a reminder played about documentation standards, recorded in the same neutral tone used everywhere else. In the break room, my clipboard had been updated with a printed addendum, adding a verification task for the corridor I had just left, time-stamped 5 minutes earlier. I signed where indicated and finished the shift without incident, though the sense of being counted lingered like a metronome just under hearing. As dawn approached, I passed the glass again and saw the chair angled slightly toward where I had stood. And when I turned away, the vibration returned steady and patient, as if waiting for me to decide whether following rules included acknowledging when something knew them too. Asterisk, by the end of that week, avoidance stopped being an option, not because I broke a rule, but because the rules began arranging my movements with increasing specificity, narrowing choices until my route felt chosen before I arrived. My schedule added tasks in tight windows that overlapped just enough to funnel me toward the reinforced corridor, and the map in my locker had been replaced with an updated version that included the older wing in clean, confident lines. When I checked the ledger, the compliance column beside my initials carried a mark I had not seen before, a small square filled in with darker ink, and the date matched the erased one I remembered from the wall. I told myself it was administrative drift, but the facility responded as if confirmation had been received. Doors held a beat longer, then opened. Lights came up gradually, rather than all at once. The intercom offered reminders timed to my pace, not announcements, but acknowledgments that a step had been completed. In the older wing, the dates on the wall had grown, extending past the ceiling line and the most recent entry matched the current night, written with pressure heavy enough to score the paint. I logged environmental readings that were already correct and felt the floor hum beneath my boots, a steady resonance that guided me toward the glass. The chair inside was occupied now, not by a person I could describe, but by a presence implied through alignment, posture suggested by the way the light pooled, and the table had been drawn closer. The voice did not initiate contact, respecting the rule with a precision that felt intentional. But the room answered my movements with adjustments, the seal indicator brightening as my hand hovered, the vibration deepening when I hesitated. I noticed the binder from the side office placed neatly on a stand beside me. Open to my page, the blank line filled with observations written in my cadence, noting punctuality, adherence, and responsiveness to cues. There was a space left at the bottom for a signature, and the pen beside it was warm. I did not sign. I completed the checklist, stepped back, and waited for the doors to unlock, which they did after a longer pause than usual, long enough for the sense of attention to sharpen into expectation. On my way out, the delivery dock lights came on, though no truck arrived, and the cameras faced inward, watching the empty floor. In the break room, my locker held fewer personal items than before, as if an inventory had been reconciled, and the second pair of gloves had been moved to the top shelf, opened and ready. I finished the shift at dawn and found my name added to the ledger once more, dated forward, with tasks assigned that assumed familiarity with procedures I had not been trained on. Driving away, the fog parted just enough to reveal the facility lights steady and awake, and I understood that leaving would require more than walking out. Because the place had already recorded my patterns and adjusted itself around them, treating my silence not as refusal, but as consent measured over time. Asterisk on my last scheduled night. The facility felt finished with introductions and focused on maintenance, the kind that keeps systems running when nothing is supposed to change. My badge worked everywhere, even doors that had never acknowledged it before, and the map no longer mattered, because the lights guided me along a route I knew without checking. The ledger waited open on the desk, my page clipped with a paper that listed outcomes instead of tasks, and the compliance square had been filled completely, edges pressed hard. I moved through the older wing and found the dates erased, replaced by a single line that ran the length of the wall, continuous and unbroken, as if counting had given way to agreement. The floor vibration matched my steps perfectly, neither leading nor following, just present. At the reinforced glass, the chair was centered, the table cleared, and the seal indicator held steady without being touched. The voice did not speak, and that absence felt deliberate, like a test already passed. I completed checks that confirmed themselves, signed forms that required only initials, and noticed my handwriting mirrored in the margins where no notes should be. When I paused, the intercom clicked once, acknowledging the pause, then fell silent. In the break room, the fridge was stocked with items I preferred without being asked, and the schedule had been simplified to one line that repeated my name across the week. I packed my things slowly, aware that inventory would reconcile again after I left, and walked the corridor one last time, counting locks I no longer noticed. At the gate, the guard was gone, the ledger already signed, the pen capped. Outside, the valley fog thinned and thickened in bands, revealing the road and hiding it again, and the facility lights stayed constant behind me. I drove until the signal returned and the radio filled the car, then pulled over to check my phone, which held a message reminding me of tonight's shift, sent from an address that did not accept replies. I turned the phone face down and waited, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, feeling the familiar hum fade from my feet. When I did not return, nothing chased me, nothing followed, and nothing called. Days passed, then weeks, and the unease softened into something like routine. Still, at night, When I lock my own door, I pause an extra second before answering anything at all, because I learned that places can keep records without walls. And silence, when measured long enough, looks exactly like staying. I keep a notebook now, empty except for dates I never write. And sometimes the lines appear anyway, straight and patient, as if time itself were checking me for consistency, waiting to see whether I follow my own rules or let the quiet decide. I do not know which answer is recorded, only that the record continues, neat and impersonal, long after the lights should be off for good. End.